Good evening, Minecrafters. This is Akesh, and I'm going to do another tutorial today. Uh, I recently recorded my first video on this very same topic, actually, and didn't go as well as I'd hoped it would. But I thought that if I showed you a version of it that had the stuff already built, and then I built it for you, you would actually be able to go ahead and follow along, and it would work out really well. So that's what I'm going to do. What I'm going to talk about today is using a couple of add-ons, mods rather, that are called IndustrialCraft 2 and EnderIO. Now I use both of them religiously in my normal server play, and I happen to love them. They're quite amazing. But in this particular case, this is actually a topic that I had a hard time uh, finding enough information on to make it a little bit easier. And I'm talking about these two particular mods specifically because they are what I use to automate ore processing. And it also does, it's a three-step process, so it also kind of expands on what you can get out of a single ore. So that's what I'm going to talk about today. What I've done is I've already actually built the thing that I'm talking about today inside this little grass wall, if you will. Inside here, we've got this whole process set up. And I've already gone through it and I've tested it and it works. It does exactly what I want it to do. Get rid of these things because they're not a whole lot of use right now. But yeah, this whole process here, basically what this does is it takes the stuff that gets put into the chest up there, so that little crate that's up there, and it drops that into this macerator right here. And this macerator pushes it down into this chest here, it gets pulled out of this chest and up into the ore washing plant, which then pushes it down into this thing here. And then it gets pulled out of that crate and pushed into the thermal centrifuge, which then drops everything into this thing. And of course I just broke it, so it's obviously not there anymore, but easy enough to put back. Drops it into this crate here, which then pulls it out and sends it to wherever this pink arrow is pointed to, or purple arrow. And that actually goes to two separate places. One goes back into this chest up here, and then the other one goes into this down here, this trash can. Now, there's a reason for that. There's some stuff that's going to get pulled out of both this machine and this one that I don't want, and that's actually called stone dust. Now, stone dust has its uses. I don't happen to have a use for it, but you can make construction foam out of it, and I don't particularly like construction foam because it's not easy to control. So I just basically destroy all of that. So I use extra utilities to go ahead and destroy that item. I don't want it taking up space in my inventory when I decide to process this sort of thing. So let me go up top here and demonstrate what this thing actually does. Now, basically what it's going to do is it's going to take whatever I put into this crate right here, and it's going to process that ore. Okay, it's going to do all kinds of stuff. So in this particular case, I'll take a stack of gold ore, and then I'm going to drop that into this crate right here, and you'll watch it generally when it's actually working. Actually pull all these things out. So let's go turn that thing back on. We'll go back down here. We'll turn on that extractor. And there we go. So the extractor is pointing to green, which is now pushing all the gold into this macerator right here, the gold ore. Okay, and once the macerator is done with it, like I said, it goes down here into this chest, this crate, and the crate then exports it out to this thing up here. It's called the ore washing plant, which effectively continues to add more processed material to it, and I ended up coming out with I think I worked out to 156 gold ingots out of a single stack of 64 after this process is all said and done. But this gets me part of the way through there. Once this thing is done, it moves from here into this machine right here, which is called the thermal centrifuge. What this does is, mechanically speaking, theoretically, it just spins it in some heat and makes the gold dust that's being pushed out of it. It's also generating some other stuff as well, but it's getting exported so quickly that it doesn't have any time to show up on the screen here. It's getting pushed down into this chest down here. So you're getting tiny piles of silver dust and gold dust, which the gold dust, obviously, if you smelt that in either a regular furnace or an enhanced alloy furnace, or enhanced alloy smelter, excuse me, you'll get a single gold ingot out of each one of those gold dust that's in there. What the ore washing plant actually produces is a whole bunch of these little tiny piles of gold dust, like these things right here. Okay, so these tiny piles of gold dust, when you add 9 of them in the crafting square, it'll create you a full-size gold dust, and you get, I think you get 4 stacks of the gold dust, and then 2 stacks of the silver. Sorry, you get 4 stacks of the tiny pile of gold dust, and you get 2 stacks of the tiny pile of silver dust, which gives you another, I think, 14 silver, just because, because you're processing gold. One wouldn't normally think you get silver, but apparently they did. You don't need to worry about any ore dictionaries or anything like that, because, well, it only processes a certain number of different ores. But I noticed that I didn't take anything out. I didn't move anything. I just showed you what it looked like. And if I come up here, I'm going to start to see all of the stuff that I pushed down into there coming up here. All right, with one exception. I'm not getting any of that stone dust because I don't want the stone dust. So it's destroying the stone dust, and it's leaving me with these tiny piles of gold dust and tiny piles of silver dust. When all is said and done, I'm going to have 2 full stacks of the gold dust right off the bat. I'm going to have 4 full stacks of the tiny piles of gold dust, and I'll have 2 full stacks of the tiny pile of silver dust. What these 4 stacks basically mean is that I'm going to have 4 tiny piles of gold dust left over, and I'll have 2 tiny piles of silver dust left over once I manufacture the full-size gold dust or the silver dust as appropriate. So, look at that. It looks like it's done. So we're going to take these all out. Okay, so there's all that. And then I'm going to break out my crafting table on a stick because I can. I'll go like this. So I got 7 out of that. I'll go up there. And then I get 7 out of each full stack that I use. So I know I'm a little slow, but what can you do? But you notice that I didn't have anything in my inventory, and it gave me 2 full stacks plus 28. So that gives me 156 gold dust out of 1 single stack of 64. Plus it also gave me about 14 of these silver dust. Okay, now once I've done that, I've got these 2 things left. If I were to put 3 stacks in there, or better yet, 4, I would end up with enough tiny piles of gold dust to make yet another one. And I would I would have enough of these tiny piles of silver dust to make another one as well. So not only would I get 3 times that again, or 4 times that rather, I would also get another single unit of it in addition, because these things do add up. On my server game, I've got lots and lots and lots of these things, mainly because I keep processing ores and not actually making the larger dusts out of these things, but they're pretty useful. But anywho, let's go ahead and get started on how to actually build this. Now, one of the reasons that I built it the way I did here was to give you kind of a demonstration about how segregated it can be, segregated the player can be from the machines themselves. Because if you didn't do it like this, you didn't automate it, you would end up having to spend a whole lot of time walking around from machine to machine. So I would start in here, and I would put the ore in there, and then I could set it to auto eject to a crate, and then I would go collect it from the crate, gather it out of there, and then walk it over to the ore washing plant, and then it would fall back into this crate down here, and then I would pull it out of that crate, and I would force it into this thing here, this thermal centrifuge, and I would have to sit there and wait for this entire process. Where by automating it the way I did, I don't have to worry about the automation process at all. I just come up in here, drop off what I want to process. Like say, for example, I wanted to process a whole stack of iron ore. Or even better, maybe I've got I've got some gold ore, I've got iron ore. I don't need to worry about coal ore. But let's see, what other kind of ore can I put in there? I don't have any silver ore, do I? There we go. All right, let's see if it processes that. Yep, it does. So I want to process all my ore. That's what I do. I drop it in there, and it handles it. I don't have to worry about it. It just does it. So I can walk away and go do what I want to do, and when I come back, all that stuff is going to be processed in here automatically. I don't have to actually have anything whatsoever to do with it, which means I'm accomplishing all kinds of other fun stuff without any of that interaction. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how to build it. Okay, now we're going to need some sort of crate. It doesn't have to be a crate, it can be a regular chest. So I'm going to use regular chests in this. So I'm going to go ahead and grab 4 chests just to be on the safe side. Because you need 3, 1 for each machine, and then of course wherever you're going to put your stuff to get it started on the automation process. Okay, now I'm going to need a macerator. I got one right there. I need an ore washing plant. So I got that. Let's see, what else do I need? I need a thermal centrifuge. So got a thermal centrifuge going on there. Okay, and then I'm going to need a couple of filters on these things. So this is where EnderIO comes in. Your EnderIO, you got IndustrialCraft 2 and EnderIO. They're the primary assets of this thing. And then of course you've got the actually additions for the crates if you were going to use them. Or you've also got the, what was it? No, you got me thinking about it. There's something else in here. Oh yeah, extra utilities for the trash can. All right, so we've got all that. So let's go ahead and get a filter. Now we're going to need a few of these filters. So we're going to need a basic filter, one for the trash can, and then we're going to need one big item filter for the, is it a big item filter? No, it's not. I've been doing this without a big item filter for a while now. Let's go ahead and use the advanced item filter. So if you can make an advanced item filter, fantastic. The advanced item filter has 10 slots on it, which means that the 9 little tiny piles will actually be able to go into there just fine. Let's go ahead and clear the inventory real quick. We don't need any of that. We're going to leave these 2 tiny piles in there so I don't have to go grab them later. Okay, put this down here. Okay, so I now need Ender fluid conduit. Okay, I'm going to need more than one of those things, but in this particular case, because we're in creative, I don't really need more than one. I'm also going to need an item conduit. Okay, so there's an item conduit, and then I'm also going to need an endervoir. Now I use the endervoir because it's basically an infinite water source. And the infinite water source is really, really useful for the ore washing plant because obviously it uses a lot of water, especially if you're mining. If you're on a, say for example, you've created a mining dimension with RF tools dimensions, you'll be able to process all of that stuff that you're pulling out of there automatically through this process. And the endervoir means that you don't have to worry about your pump running dry or having a single floor block on the floor or in the floor to go ahead and pull that water from. So we put up the endervoir, and basically it just means that we've got infinite water, which is kind of awesome. I'm also going to use the 3x insulated HV cable. Now, you're going to want to be careful about what cables you use and your energy producers, because if you don't have the explosives turned off, you're going to find out very quickly that you've overvolted. You basically provided overvoltage to these machines. The thermal centrifuge is a power tier 2, but the ore washing plant and the macerator are power tier 1, which means they're low voltage. They don't require a lot of power unless you put the upgrades in like I do. Okay, and we'll talk about the upgrades as I do them. I'm not going to grab them right off the bat. Okay, but we do need the filters. I'm going to go ahead and drop those up there because we don't need them right away. We do, however, need all of this stuff. Okay. I'm also going to use creative generators, but you're going to want to make sure that you use a fairly robust power generation system for this. These machines all, when running together, use a lot of power, and they can cause each other to drain their power reserves that are built in, because each of these things has a built-in power reserve. I'm going to put down enough creative generators that it'll generally keep it pretty well, but again, you want to make sure that you've got a fairly robust power generation system before you try to implement upgrades on any of these machines. Without upgrades, these things will run almost indefinitely on even a single creative generator because they're slow enough that they're not drawing as much power. Again, I'll get into the upgrades as I've got the whole thing set up. So what I'm going to do first things first, I'm going to dig a hole that's going to work out really well for my power generation. Now in this particular case, I'm only going down to the bedrock, but that's because of the particular type of land that I generated here, or world rather. Drop in some HV cable, and we'll go like this. Okay, now it's not really important that you have your power generation underneath it. It's just important that you have your power coming from either below it or directly above it. I prefer below because, well, it's simpler that way. It means that I can put stuff on top of this thing and not have to worry about it. Depends entirely on your personal preference. You could have power generation going somewhere else and just have a line run in if you want to. I happen to prefer this particular setup, and more often than not, I do run a single cable underneath whatever I happen to be connecting to, and then just run it up underneath this thing. This is one of the most compact versions of this stack that I've ever built. There's another way that I could potentially do it that would involve a lot more filters and only a single chest, but that's not something that I've investigated yet. I'm going to get into a little bit more detail with that one later on. I'm going to go ahead and drop down 3 chests because, well, we're going to need them. And I'm going to run 2 of these wire, 2 of the 30x insulated high voltage cables out of the ground. So they're going to be actually connecting to each of these things. I'm going to start on the side over here. So that's the macerator right there. I'm going to move over to the ore washing plant on this side. And certainly, last but certainly not least, we've got the thermal centrifuge. Now that gives us the basis for what we're going to be doing here. There's a whole bunch of other stuff that we can do, but in this particular case, we're pretty much going to stop there as far as the machines go. First things first. Before we go any further than this, I want to go ahead and set up the endervoir. Now, you don't have to use the endervoir. Whatever method you want to use to get water from wherever you want to get it, be it either some sort of water source that's built into your environment, or if you decide you want to just dig a hole and go put some water in it, you can do that too. I happen to like using the endervoirs because, again, it's an infinite water source and it's super easy to build. I'm going to go ahead and get myself a free bucket of water over here. I'll replace the endervoir with it. Put one in there, one in there. See, it only takes 2 buckets of water to fill up all 6 of these blocks. Okay, and I use 6 because 6 seems to be more quote-unquote infinite for this particular purpose, because it does dry this thing out. If it's only 4 blocks, it dries it out completely, which means I got to fill it up again. I don't want to do that, so this is the easiest way to prevent that from happening. And then I'm going to run an ender fluid conduit from over there straight across here into the ore washing plant. Now what that means is I've also got to come over here and I'm going to turn on extract. So anytime you connect an ender conduit, doesn't matter which one it is, be it the fluid conduit, the power conduits, or the item conduits, or the redstone conduits, you're going to have an interface like this, okay? And once it's connected to something, you can tell pretty quickly what it is based on the little icons that show up over here. And what I really like about the EnderIO stuff is that you can have multiple items appearing in each square. So had there been another item interface that could connect to this thing on this endervoir, I would have been able to modify the item interface here. I can do it over here. So you see here we've got the item interface, which has got this green little tint to it. And then down here we've got the fluid interface. And if for whatever reason your brain just doesn't comprehend this, because I know people's brains work differently, maybe this doesn't make a whole lot of sense, and I know I can't keep these things straight. I usually look down here. If I look at these filters, the liquid one, the one that works for the fluids, has a little drop on it, which tells me, hey, this one is for the fluid. And then this one up here just has a regular basic filter. So it looks like these things down here, and I can tell that that one is just a regular item filter. Now in this particular case, I don't want that, that extra item conduit on there, so I'm going to go ahead and break it and take it off of the chest over here. So we've got ender fluid conduit, item conduit, and I'm going to put the fluid conduit back because, well, I kind of need the fluid conduit. So once you've actually got this interface on here, you want to come in here on the side that you're taking the water from. So we're taking the water from the endervoir. You're going to right click on that, and then we're going to turn off insert because we don't want to put the water back. We do want to come over here though. This thing doesn't matter so much for the water sources, but we want to leave self-feed off because otherwise it'll just sit there and pull water in a cycle. So it'll pull water and then push it back in, pull water and then push it back in, and that's not what we want. So we're going to turn self-feed off. But what we want to do is we want to turn on this redstone mode. Okay, right now it just says never active, but if we single click on it, we've got the always active, and you'll notice that the water starts moving in that tank back there. Okay, now it's kind of important that you turn this on and make sure it's always active. Otherwise, your ore washing plant's going to go dry, and obviously, if it goes dry, it's not going to process much at all. On the other end, we can turn off extract because we don't really need extract. We don't want it pulling the water back out of the endervoir or the ore washing plant rather. But one of the things that I haven't mentioned yet is these colored little boxes right here. When you put your mouse over, it says channel on it. One of my favorite things about EnderIO is that you can choose where your items go or where your fluids go based on the channel that you're producing here. Okay, so if you select green on here, whatever you pull on green is going to go to wherever green is on insert. Okay, so if I change this to blue or brown or any other color, it's not going to go anywhere because there's no output for it. So what I want to do is I want to make sure that this color that I'm extracting matches the color where I want it to go. And once you do that on insert, you've basically got a single pipeline that is dedicated to that particular item or fluid. Pretty cool. I happen to like the EnderIO for that. One of the other parts that I really like is the fact that, like I demonstrated before, I can actually mix and match these connectors here. Okay. Get rid of that thing. So if I do that, if I make this cross piece here, any of these items that come across here will actually just transit this whole thing, and I can actually connect these things to any other of these pipes here and have it work the way I want it to. Okay. In this particular case, I'm going to leave this one up here on. I'm going to turn off extract because I don't want it to extract anything. I do, however, want to insert green. Now, what I really like about EnderIO, I already talked about the channels, but what I really like about EnderIO is that even if you have multiple EnderIO conduits, the colors don't mix. So green items conduits don't mix with green fluid conduits, which is great because then I can set green channel items to go into green channel item inventories versus fluid inventories like this one over here. This is a fluid inventory. And then obviously the Macerator here has an item inventory, which goes right there. Okay, so I want this thing to insert green. What I don't want is this thing to do anything. I don't need extract. I don't even need insert on this one. Okay, so I am going to turn that off. And the conduit basically just stops having that interface there, which I really like. Okay. Now, let's go ahead and connect up some of these items here. One of the first places that we need to go is to basically make it look like that. Like I said, you can put this in the ground if you want to, or we can do something similar to it. We'll just put it down here on the ground. I'm going to put a chest down here just because, to make it easy. I'm going to put an item conduit next to it. Okay. Then I'm going to go up and over. Okay. So now this Ender conduit, this Ender item conduit, is connected to all the inventories that it could potentially connect to right now, including this chest and the macerator right now. The next piece that I'm going to connect is actually down here and there. Okay, so using these Ender conduits, these item conduits, I'm going to turn this one off because I don't need anything extracted directly from that. I'm just going to push down into here. And I don't need this thing extracting. I need this thing inserting. But what I do want it to insert is brown. Okay, so I want this thing to extract on brown and always be active. And then I'm going to come over here and make sure that this thing says brown on insert. And then it's got priority. So I'm going to just kick it up one. Now that priority basically means that it's going to go here first unless this inventory is full. If this inventory is full, it'll go to the next thing in the priority, which will be all the rest of them, 0, assuming that this channel is the same. Okay. Now down here, this is where it gets a little fun, because this is where we're going to use our first filter, which is this thing down here. Now, remember I talked about the filter early on. I'm actually going to put it on the extract over here. So first things first, I'm going to put this to purple. Now, purple is the end destination. That's the chest that's out there where we put the stuff to begin with. Okay, at least that's the channel that I like to use. We've got round robin. We're going to turn that on because we want it to pull items from every slot rather than just the first one. Okay, we don't necessarily want it to just drain the first one. We could turn it off. Doesn't really matter over much, but round robin enabled means it's going to pull more than one item type at any given time. Self-feed again disabled. We don't want that turned on, and we do want to turn on redstone mode, always active. So you just do that by single clicking on it. Now for you righties, it could be a left click, and for you lefties, it's probably a right click. Okay. So we've got this filter in here. Now this filter can be a little bit confusing. I fought with it for probably about an hour when I first started setting this whole thing up, and that was one of the reasons that I went and looked out for some YouTube videos on how to do this, but none of them were really clear about it. But I figured it out, and once I got in here, I was able to understand exactly what I was going for. Once I figured out that I needed this particular item, the advanced item filter. Now, like I said earlier, the advanced item filter has 10 slots. And this is important because we've got 9 different types of tiny piles that we want to put in here. Now, I've only found the first 2, which are right here. But let's talk about the rest of this thing here and what this is actually going to do. So right now, I've got it set to extract, and I've got this filter set to only pull gold and silver tiny piles. Okay, so tiny pile of silver dust and tiny pile of gold dust. What that means is that in this chest, it's only going to pull out those 2 items and export that to purple. Okay, now what I'm going to do now here is go over here and I'm going to set the insert on the originating chest to purple, because I want this thing to receive all of the items that it's supposed to receive, which include the tiny piles and those gold dust that I was talking about. Remember those dusts? Gold dust, silver dust, iron dust. We're talking about those piles. We want to make sure that this thing gets all of them. Okay, so let's go ahead and grab some more of these tiny piles here. So we've got bronze, we've got copper, we've already got gold. We don't have iron yet. We'll grab lapis, even though we're not going to use it all that much. Lead. We don't worry about lithium or obsidian. We've got silver. We want sulfur, and we want tin. Now, we don't want these last 3. These last 3 are kind of important not to get. Okay, you don't want to process uranium through this thing, because when you go to pick it up, you're probably going to die. Okay, radio it's a pretty deadly piece of the uranium stuff. All 3 different versions, because you've got uranium-235, you've got the uranium-238, and of course you've got plutonium. They're all radioactive, and they will kill you. You'll get sick, and the sickness won't wear off before you die. And there's no amount of healing that you can do to get out of it. So unless you've got a full radiation suit, you probably don't want to mess with any of that. I typically just won't mess with it, so I've only got 9 different items that I'll use in this filter. So now that I've actually got all the items that I want to put in there, I've already got the silver and the gold, so these two right here. So I want to go ahead and grab the other ones. And I want to put those up in here. And there we go. Okay, so now when we are actually processing ores, it's only going to pull out those particular items, the ones that are inside this filter. And that's because I set this thing to whitelist. Now, you're probably familiar with whitelist, but I'll explain what it is. Basically, it just means only these items can get through. Now, if I flip this and clicked it to blacklist, what that means is that only these items can't get through. These items will never cross as long as this thing says blacklist. It will never pull those items. Now, I could potentially do that on things like the stone or on the crushed ores and whatnot, but I happen to like doing it on the tiny piles because I know that the tiny piles are the ones that I want to get out of there. Okay, I don't want really to export the stone up to there, but I could. Okay, so in this case, it's actually only going to pull those pieces there. All right, then you've got this match metadata, which for this particular purpose doesn't mean much, but the metadata just means it's got all kinds of extra code in the background describing these items for Minecraft items. If they don't match, like all these things are all exactly the same. If they don't match for whatever reason, it won't pull them. If you turn that off, it ignores them completely. So even if they have, say for example, you have this thing set to pull particular weapons, like the ender swords. They all have different metadata. So you'll have ones of traveling, you'll have ender swords of traveling and knockback or something like that. If you ignore the metadata, it's always going to pull all the ender swords no matter which versions they are. So if they have traveling or if they have knockback or anything else like that, even if they don't, it'll still pull them. Okay. Ore dictionary doesn't really matter in this particular case for this specific purpose. If you happen to be using this to automate your item sorting methods, specifically for EnderIO, you would want to turn that on if you want, say, for example, all 3 different versions of copper to go in the same place, or the 2 different versions of iron that are floating around out there. Various things like that. So if you have multiple mods that mix a bunch of different ores in here, if you're not careful, you'll end up with a bunch of stuff that just goes all over the place. So yeah, in this case, we can turn it off because it doesn't matter much. Once it gets to this chest, it's already going to be IndustrialCraft. Otherwise, you would have to turn this thing on and have it pull down all the other ores. Now, when I first built my mod pack, I made sure that I disabled all of the additional ores so that we didn't get duplicates of things like copper, gold, lead, and all that stuff. So we've only got 1 of each of the ores in this particular instance of Minecraft. NBT, I'm not actually sure what NBT is, but I typically don't care what it says. I just leave that on or off. It doesn't really matter for what I do. And then, of course, over here, you've got ignore damage, which, again, doesn't matter all that much for me. Because again, these items are all identical every time anyway. We don't really have to worry about damage too much. Okay, now we can leave it not damaged, or we can leave it damaged, or just ignore damage, which is typically what I do, because the ignore damage is the important part. We don't care. Okay, as long as it's got all of these items in here, it's only going to pull those items, and we've done what we need to do on this particular chest. Okay, so what it's going to do is it's going to push from here into the macerator. The macerator is going to process it and push it down into this chest. This extractor right here is going to pull it out, and it's going to put it in here into the ore washing plant. And the ore washing plant has water in it, so it's going to wash whatever ore shows up in there. It's going to give you some crushed ore. Then once it's done processing, once we give it the right upgrades, it's going to push down into here. And now what we need to do is set this thing up so that it finishes what it's supposed to do. Okay, so we can turn that off because we don't need anything pushing back in there. We can set this thing to blue and always active. And then we can come over here and say insert blue, turn that off, because we don't really need anything else on that. And then when this thing is done processing, it's going to push everything back down into here. And we want this to extract to purple. Now, you'll remember that we already talked about having this thing extract to purple before. Okay? Now, in this particular case, we don't really care about filters because we're going to extract anything that shows up in this chest. Doesn't really matter what it is. Okay? Because sometimes this thing will extract some stone dust, sometimes this thing will extract some stone dust. Whatever it does, we want it to be able to pull all of that stuff out and send it to wherever it needs to go. In this particular case, I've already got the purple one over there to receive items that are exported to purple. And what we're going to do on here is, actually, we're going to ignore that completely. Go figure. Let me go get that trash can that I was talking about early on. So grab this trash can here. Put that there. Okay. Now, I typically like to put the trash can somewhere away from the various places that it might potentially go. I don't want it to be like down here with all this stuff because I don't really want to use the trash can. So I'll put it up here, and then what I'll do is I'll set this thing right here. Remember, we've got this extraction plate here. I'm going to set this thing to insert purple. I'm going to set it to priority 2, and then I'm going to drop a basic item filter on it. Now this basic item filter is going to serve one purpose and one purpose only. It's going to filter out and exclude only to stone dust. Okay? So I don't want any stone dust to go anywhere else but here. And you see this is whitelisted, which means only stone dust is going to pass through this filter. Stone dust goes straight into the trash can, and I don't worry about it at all. Okay? And then what I do is I will come down here and I will filter. I'll get another basic filter because I don't really need anything else. So far we've used 2 basic filters and 1 advanced item filter. We come down here. Ooh, I got 2. Nice. Go ahead and put that in there. Okay. Oh, not extract. Insert. Okay. Once we've got insert, we're going to click on this filter and we're going to change this to blacklist. We want to blacklist everything that is stone dust. Blacklist stone dust entirely, which means that this item, no stone dust will ever go in this chest. It will always go to the other one. It'll go up to that trash can that we were talking about. Okay. And we want to make sure that we turn this thing on, so anything that gets put into it gets pulled out and pushed into the macerator. Okay. So right now, believe it or not, this thing is actually fully functional. I can put ore in here, just like so, or at least I should be able to. So I'm going to put a single ore in there. I don't want to go ahead and process all 64. Actually, you know what? I'm going to take 10 because I want you to actually be able to see what the upgrades do as I add them. So I'm going to drop that in there, and it's going to take them all, and it's going to push them into the macerator. And you remember that I was telling you the macerator basically just crushes these things out, smashes them up together, and it creates 2 crushed ore, okay, out of each single ore. Right there you go. You've got 2 crushed ore. Now, you see what it's not doing? It's not actually pushing any items down into the chest. That's what we need the upgrades for. Okay, so what we need is an ejector upgrade. Now I'm going to take 3 of these because we do need 3. We want it to be able to automatically push these items into the first valid side, which is why we set it up the way we did. So you see in the background here, I'm going to go ahead and back out just a little bit. You see it's kind of laid out in effectively a star pattern. It's not really a star pattern, obviously, but you get the power down the center, and then you got each of these inventories that are discretely separated. So there's nothing connecting this item here, this machine, to that inventory. There's also nothing connecting directly from here to this, which means that anytime this machine wants to finish processing something and eject it, it's only going to go into this chest, which is exactly what we want. We want absolute control over where these items go. All right, so we've got that whole process. Let's go up in here, and we're going to go ahead and add the ejector upgrade. And you notice that it empties the inventory completely, okay, which is great. I love it when it does that, because what happens is, as soon as that inventory sees, hey, there's something to pull out of there, it's going to push it into the ore washing plant. Okay, Now, you remember when I was talking about this earlier, when I set it up, I said it's pulling a lot of water. Now, right now, it's not pulling a whole lot of water because it's not going too terribly fast. But it's going to process all of that stuff, and then it's just going to sit here. Why? Because we haven't put the ejector upgrade in it yet. Okay, so let's go ahead and do that. And then it's going to clear out its own inventory into this chest down here, which we can't open because it's not something that we can access because there's an item on top of it. And then all the items get pulled out of here and they get dropped into the thermal centrifuge. Now, you can see on here that this thing needs to take a little bit of time to warm up. It's not going to process anything until it actually does warm up. Okay, it'll probably get roughly about halfway to 3/4 of the way, and then this thing will start going, and it'll start actually processing these items. Now, this does take a little bit of time, and after it's finished, I'm going to go ahead and show you how to prevent that from happening, to prevent this from taking place. It's going to use a lot of power, but it will always process immediately rather than you having to sit here and wait for it. Okay, but before we do that, we're going to talk about the rest of the upgrades. Now, we put that last ejector upgrade in here because we want this thing's inventory to automatically empty, and that's exactly what we want. We want it to push down into here so that when it's done, it'll push. Ooh, look at that. I just caught myself a problem. Need that, and need a connection. That would not have been good. It would not have actually connected to that item over there, that chest over there. It would have just kind of sat inside this chest and would not have gone anywhere. So I'm glad I caught that. I could have theoretically gone straight across there, but it doesn't really hurt anything to have it sit on top of this. You could theoretically make this entire thing 3x3 horizontally. Vertically, it's still 3x3. If you wanted to put the chest up here on the opposite side of the fluid conduit, you could. I wouldn't really recommend it. I happen to like having it discreetly separate from the entire process. This thing is processing some stuff, and it's already ejected. You see this yellow bar here. It's going to keep going up as it processes each item, and then it automatically ejects it out to the inventory down there. Okay, and then if we go over here, we can take a look at what it's pulling out, which we knew was going to happen. Okay, because remember, I warned you, it's going to pull out a single gold dust, a tiny pile of silver dust, and of course, a tiny pile of gold dust out of the this thing right here. Okay, so for every time it processes from the thermal centrifuge, you get a gold dust and some silver dust. You're going to get gold dust, the tiny piles of gold dust, out of the ore washing plant as well. Okay, and you can see the water changing levels in here. Now, one of my favorite things to do is to upgrade these things so that they go faster. And just so that we have something always happening in here, I'm going to drop some more ores in here. So let's go ahead and drop a stack of ore into this. And then we're going to watch it push it all, which is fine. All right, now remember that I was talking about speed processing upgrades a little bit ago. So this is actually called the overclocking upgrade, the overclocker upgrade, excuse me. And what this does is it increases the speed at which the machines process these things, but at the expense of additional power. Okay, now if I happen to drop 64 of them in there, it would process instantly, but I would have no power because you can see this long number down here where it says increased power to. That thing is 12 digits long. I'm sorry, 16 digits long, excuse me. And that 16 digits basically means it's multiplying your power by 14 of those digits, the first 14. That's a lot of digits. And I don't know about anybody that can generate that much power. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to kind of inch our way up to a little bit of power. We're probably going to get about 9 of these things in here. But if we put 1 in there, it's going to go a lot faster. Okay, we just decreased the process time to 70%, which means it's now going 30% faster than it was before, or just reduced 30% of the processing time. Now, if I add another one, it's going to cut it down to 49%, which means I just took off another 21% of the processing time by adding another one. Add another one, and we're down to 34%. Okay, Now, I'm probably going to get it up to, like I said, 7, 8, 9, I believe. So 9 cuts it down to a 4% processing time. Okay, which means I'm going to be able to process 25 of these things at the same speed I was able to produce one before. Okay, which is great. All right, so now it's processing these things really, really quickly. All right, which means now this thing's got to process a whole bunch of stuff really quickly. Okay, so we need to put some overclockers in this one as well. Now I think the limit on this one was 7. I'm not 100% sure, but let's go ahead and add some to begin with. So we've got 5 in there, and it's going a lot faster than it was, but not fast enough. So we're going to go ahead and tack that thing on. We're still over the voltage that it's normally got. Got 7 in there now. All right, looks like we're still stable. And we're still stable. And let's go ahead and see 9. Looks like 9 is still stable. I don't think 10 will let me. Ooh, it does let me do 10. That's impressive. I'll keep it. Now, you'll notice that, like I said earlier, and you watched me put the creative generators in the ground, I've got 12 creative generators on this thing, which basically means I've got 3 of these, or 4 of these things dedicated to each machine. That means it's producing plenty of power, but you'll also notice that it's pulling a lot of water. Okay, remember how I was saying earlier that the water could be a problem? This thing, with the full 10 upgrades in there, is going so fast that the water can't keep up. So we probably have to dial that one back a little bit. So I'll cut it back to 9, which basically means that the ender conduits can keep up with the water intake and the power doesn't drain. So this red lightning bolt over here doesn't just die. Because if you put too many upgrades in this thing, the power goes down ridiculously fast, and then it just won't work. Okay, now once this thing is done, like I said, it's going to go process it over here. This one has some heck of limitations on it. You really don't want to go over about 7 or 8 of these overclocker upgrades because this thing eats a lot of power to begin with. Okay, you notice that it's got a 48K buffer on it. Each one of these things adds a little bit to that buffer. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and add one, and you can see the buffer has just gone up by a little under 1 rather. Okay, so if I take it out, it's 48K. Put it back in, it's 50K. Oh, so it's almost 3 then. It's a little under 3, not 1. My brain and math don't work all that well. But we'll go over here, and I'll just go ahead and add some. Now, the big thing that I'm paying attention to here is not just the speed at which it's processing, but this power thing over here. If this thing starts dropping really, really fast, I can't keep this thing running indefinitely. So what I do is I sit there and I'll put one in there at a time until I find the right balance of the power staying in there versus processing time. Now I think this one is the one that's limited to 7. I might be wrong though with this particular configuration. Looks like it'll let me do 8. Let's see, 9. Okay, so you probably saw that thing drop down just a touch. Okay, I'm going to leave it at 9 because right now it's managing to power this thing in spite of the fact that this thing is running. Oh wait, this thing's off. No, so that's why. Okay, so I'm going to dial this one back just a little bit. Then I'm going to go over here and I'm going to put some more gold in here. Okay, and what that'll do is that'll give this thing some use, that'll give the Macerator some use, and you'll see what the power does while this thing is upgraded and using all the power. Okay, so if I put 9 in here, that power drops really, really fast, as long as the other machines are running. But if I only leave 8 in there, it's going to stay pretty well charged, and it's going to keep it up at the top of the collection here. This buffer is going to stay pretty high. And there's some ways around that. There's some ways to prevent it from draining quite so quick. There's some ways to give it some extra power and whatnot. And we'll talk about how that works on the Macerator over here. Now, this one's already done. It's already processed all 64 of those things. But what we can do is we can do an energy storage upgrade. So we're going to take that And I'm actually going to grab the transformer upgrades as well, because those are important if you're going to use the default settings for IndustrialCraft, which basically mean that if you supply over voltage to any of these machines, they will explode. We're going to talk about these transformer upgrades, because these transformer upgrades are what prevent that from happening on overpowered items. So if you have a transformer upgrade in this, it'll be able to handle the high voltage power that I'm providing to it. Like I said at the beginning of this, I turned that particular setting off because I don't happen to like explosive machines. So I turned it all off because I don't want that. But what I do want is I want to talk about how these energy storage upgrades work. Now, these energy storage upgrades, each one of these things adds, I believe, 10,000 EU. Now, what that does is it means 10,000 EU go onto this extra buffer here. So if I chuck 1 on there, it's just now added 10,000 EU, so 10K EU on here. Okay. Now I happen to want all 16 in there, so it's going to add a heck of a buffer on this thing. Doesn't mean it's going to stay alive that much longer if I happen to turn off the power. Okay, because this thing will drain the power really, really fast. Not as fast as the thermal generator, though. Excuse me, the thermal centrifuge. Okay. I'm going to go over here, do the same thing. Go ahead and drop that energy storage in there, energy storage upgrade, and do the same thing over here. And then this one you'll notice gets a heck of a lot more out of it than the other items, because this one has a much higher buffer to begin with. Okay, now if I put that in there, this thing goes up to 250. I don't want this one in here, because if I leave the 9 in there, then it's going to overpower itself, and this thing will drain really, really quick. I don't want that. Okay, and now with these transformer upgrades, we're going to go ahead and start back with the Macerator. Are you seeing a trend here yet? These transformer upgrades, I'm not 100% sure how many you would actually need. I will typically put between 6 and 8 on there, just in case, because it does increase 1 tier per transformer upgrade. So you might only need 2 or 3 to get it to the point where it doesn't explode when you hook power up to it. Go ahead and take a look at the IndustrialCraft wiki to find out what these things actually do. I do know that they prevent these objects from exploding anytime you put over voltage to them. So I'll typically put, like I said, between 6 and 8. 8 seems like a fair number. You can get pretty easily down to 8. Probably better than I can, because I'm obviously not doing so well at this. There. I don't know why I did that. I've only got 3 machines. Okay, so I've gone ahead and dropped in the transformer upgrades. And I'll go ahead and do that over here too. Not that it needs it. And over here as well. Okay, so what I've got now is a fairly quick automatic ore processing system. Now, this whole 3x3x3 block is not, if not 100% full, because we're just missing that 1 block there, pretty darn close. And then you can actually put this thing anywhere you want. Doesn't really matter where it goes, as long as you've got the right colors and the colors match to go into each of your items. Okay, so just as a quick demonstration, I'm going to go ahead and clear the inventories of these items over here. Oh, can't clear that one, so I'll clear this. Okay, so I've cleared the inventories of the various items that are out here. And let's go ahead and, I'll pick that up in a second. But I'm going to go ahead and dump all of this. Okay, now this might not look identical to the one I showed you at the beginning, but this is actually pretty darn close to what I built for the demonstration one earlier. And you notice that I got all the items still. I know this takes a little bit of time that you probably don't want to watch, but we'll go ahead and demonstrate this real quick. I'll stop at just the inventory. I'm not going to clear the action bar here. Okay. So what I want is I want to go ahead and get some more ores. Now, if you remember, the first ones I did earlier were gold, iron, and I think I did silver, didn't I? Yeah, I think I did silver. I'm going to chuck those all in there. And then I'm going to come up here and I'm going to show you what came out. Okay, so if I click on this thing, this is what I got out of the same stuff that I just put in that one over there. All right, so I've got, let's see, it's all the gold dust. So I'm going to bring down the gold dust stacks that were created by the gold, processing the gold dust, which are that there. Okay, then I've got silver dust, which I ended up with 2 stacks, and I believe it was 4 stacks of silver dust and 2 stacks of gold dust. And then of course we've got iron dust, several stacks of iron dust. See, got some lead dust in here. Actually, you know what? These came from up here, and these came from the silver. That's how that worked out. Okay, so we got 2 full stacks of iron dust. We've got another 28 iron dust out of these stacks here, and then we've got 14 14 gold dust out of 1 stack of iron. Okay, which means we got another 14 gold ingots out of iron. Yeah, iron. Go figure, right? Down here in silver, we end up with some lead. We end up with 4 piles of silver dust, and then 2 silver dust. And then, of course, for the gold dust, we get 2 stacks of gold dust, 4 stacks of tiny pile of gold dust, and then 2 stacks of silver dust. Or a tiny pile of silver dust, which, of course, create another 14 of the silver dust. So, all told, this thing is actually creating a massive amount of ore that we don't have to go and mine because it just doubled and then some each of our ores that we dropped in there. So, if you have any questions about how this whole process works, or if you have some ideas about how I can improve this whole thing, go ahead and let me know in the comments, and I'd be happy to take on your ideas. If you have questions about how these things work, or if something's giving you some trouble, go ahead and shoot me a note. I'll be happy to help you out. And that said, I'm going to go ahead and sign off for now, so happy crafting.